Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Evidence Library event. It's good to see so many of you, many familiar faces and many people that I've not met before. So great to see you all. What we're going to do over the next hour or so is firstly, just do a little bit of an introduction to this morning's event. And then Belinda is going to speak for a little while with some reflections on the briefing that she's written for us recently. And then we're going to open it up to some questions from you all. So if you have a question at any point this morning, if you want to pop it in the chat, Russell Webster's here and he's going to keep an eye on that for us and facilitate that Q&A section. So I'm Christopher Stacey. I'm Director of Support and Development at Clinks. This is the fourth in this series of opportunities to ask questions of leading academics to talk about the latest research on a particular important topic in criminal justice. So I'm absolutely delighted that Professor Belinda Winder is with us this morning. She's Professor of Forensic Psychology at Nottingham Trent University. She's also Director of the Centre of Crime, Offending, Prevention and Engagement as part of the Sexual Offences, Crime and Misconduct Research Unit. I hope I've got that right, Belinda. Please correct me if I didn't. And she's summarised the evidence base on effective practice when people have a sexual conviction in a review for our evidence library, which was published by Clinks last month. So you should have had a copy of that in the event details for this morning, but there'll be a link posted in the chat about that as well. So if you want to open that, you can do. And Belinda's going to talk for a few minutes just to introduce that review. I'll pose a few questions to her and then we'll open it up for you all to ask questions. And then Russell Webster, who's been working with us in producing these briefings, will lead that Q&A section. So without further ado, Belinda, I'm coming to you now. So Belinda, really thank you for being with us this morning. Everyone's had the copy of the briefing that you wrote on effective practice when people have a sexual conviction. So could I just ask you to start by talking about a few key takeaway points that you would like to draw out of that briefing, and then I'll get to a few interesting questions for you. That's okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so yeah, I picked a couple of things that I guess really get at me when thinking about how we support, how we work with, how we reintegrate or integrate someone with a sexual conviction. And the first one is going to be about language and terminology, really. And if you look at, if you're a little bit bored and you look at some of the papers that I written some years ago, you'll see I use the phrase sex offender. And I would hope that now you will never see me use the phrase other than the fact I've just said that, because the way we talk about people really impacts upon the person. It impacts upon their well-being. It impacts upon how our brains perceive and react to someone. So it's different if they're called a sex offender rather than someone with a sexual conviction. So the physiological measures show that we all react with, more fear, more anger, depending on how someone is termed. It also affects, and for voluntary organisations, it affects how likely people are to volunteer. So there's a number of ways in which what we call someone and how we frame a conviction really impacts how the world and themselves how the person is viewed. So the Clinks report has a little link to a document, a briefing report that myself and a couple of colleagues wrote. And it's always about saying this person-centered language that we've adopted so well in other areas, in kind of health and in terms of disability, but we still fail to do. We still talk about offenders, we talk about ex-prisoners, we still kind of keep people stuck in that past where they were. And I was talking I was giving a talk a few months ago, and I was saying to people, for example, if if they went out one weekend, let's say, or people the Diamond Jubilee weekend, let's say people go out, have a few too many drinks, become drunk, would they want people forevermore to refer to them as a drunk? Would that be their pervading status? Would that be the only thing, that little label? Would that just stay with people? Because that's what we do sometimes with our language. So really, my plea is for us all to think about it's person or people with a sexual conviction, and not even a person with sexual convictions. We kind of add on the S as if, oh, you know, there's plenty of them. It's you know, person with a sexual conviction or person with a and I guess to lead first with the sort of humanity, with what we've got in common, the person, and then the act afterwards. It takes more words, and it feels a bit clumsy to start with, but I think it really matters, and we know that it matters in so many different ways empirically, as I say, about the volunteering, about the way we react to people, the way people feel about themselves. And I guess against that, and I've had this kind of discussion with a colleague, is about what about the opinion of people, for example, people who are serving sentences in prison at the moment. How do people, you know, how do people feel about the label? What, you know, what would people call themselves? And there's an interesting kind of a dichotomy really. Sometimes people in prison want to be called prisoners. No, we feel happier and safer. We're part of this homogenous group, because this sort of standing out can feel unsafe, can feel scary. If you're this individual now, you're this person, rather than this kind of group of prisoners. So I think it's important, sure, to take into account what people want to be called and how they view themselves. But I think very much I would really encourage all voluntary organisations, all people involved, with anyone with a conviction. It's just one part of who they are. You know, and sometimes, you know, and the further in the past it is, it can be quite a small part of who they are now, and they may well have a very new identity now, something strong, something good about them. But if we keep hankering back to that worst thing that they ever did, and we stick that with them the whole time, then we are really stopping people from moving forward and moving on, and we're increasing, you know, risk of harm in many different ways, not just to the person with conviction, but, you know, to you know, well, to anyone, to everyone really. So I guess that's one of my pleas, is about language and terminology, and being really clear. It should be a person with a conviction. So the second bit, I guess, I'd pick up on really is about trauma. And it was some years ago, possibly 25 years ago, I was talking to someone in prison, and and they'd committed a murder, been convicted of a murder. And I was absolutely struck by how traumatized they were by their actions. And I think this is something that certainly just absolutely doesn't come across in the media, well, just in general life. People do not understand or realize the amount of trauma that people have caused themselves through their actions. And I think being a more, you know, we've all become a little bit more aware of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, but I think we still don't really take into account and don't perhaps offer up the sort of narrative and make other people aware of how much people are traumatized by what they have done. And sometimes the things that we have done ourselves are the things that can, in some ways, traumatize us most. I think this probably leads on to disclosure, which I don't think I've particularly covered to much extent in the evidence, but I think disclosure is seen as this sort of panacea. It's like, well, as long as everything's disclosed to everyone, then everything will be all right. And actually, the act of disclosing, the communication of disclosure, I think these can actually cause real harm. To have something disclosed to you, something you weren't expecting, something you don't know how to deal with, it will ignite all those kind of fears and worries and some of the sort of sensationalist and the irrational kind of links. You've seen sort of media headlines, you've seen newspapers, you've seen, and sometimes it would just it'll perpetuate and actually increase the amount of fear, and that can cause harm again to all sorts of people. The person who is being disclosed about, the people who have been the people who've received harm, been the victims of harm. And I think I make a link in the report to a gentleman, a really articulate gentleman, who was the son of one of the Peter Sutcliffe's victims, who says about the trauma or actually it keep coming up in the papers and being reminded of it again and again. And so I think becoming more aware of the trauma, perpetration-induced trauma is something that that's something I'm really looking into now. And as I say, linked to that is also about the disclosure and the trauma of having things disclosed about yourself and having to disclose things about yourself, the almost shameful act, having to have it kind of put in your face again and again and again, and how that feels. So I guess my plea would also be to organisations to think about how disclosure is handled. Is it necessary? Is it important? Any risk of harm, how should that be managed and measured, and who should know what, and how transparent are you with people who may be, for example, applying to do work? How transparent are you about what will happen, what they will need to disclose, what will happen to that information, what sort of decisions will be made about that, so that it becomes less about that continually facing the trauma of the worst thing you've done kind of every day, really, which is what sometimes disclosure can end up as, really. And I think another thing, license conditions, again, it's I'm picking up on these because I've been really looking into the evidence base for license conditions. Of course, license conditions are there to protect the public, reduce harm, keep people safe, but I still can't find a good evidence base, or even an evidence base, for many of the license conditions. And the one in particular I have some beef with is, for someone with a sexual conviction, is the no association condition, which many individuals with sexual conviction have. So they cannot associate with, and the license condition, I think, is another known, I'm not going to use air quotes, but a known person who's known to have a sexual conviction. And that just leaves people so isolated. I mean, where there's good reason, where someone has conducted, has committed an offence in a group, absolutely. But often the no association condition is given to almost everyone with a sexual conviction. And that means you're leaving people, a sexual conviction, who's often have few family and friends. Often they've become isolated from them because of the nature of the offence, because of the time spent in prison. And then they can't also associate with anyone that they have come to know in prison. And some of the arguments I hear, well, people will go and offend together, or when we think about actually the really low reoffending rate of sexual offences. And I think there was a study in New York about pairing people up as a kind of a peer support, which seemed to work really well. And I think thinking about the evidence base for license conditions and working out, is it, which are the best ones to protect people, and which ones are actually kind of harmful, which ones don't either protect the public, don't reduce harm. I think is a particular mission, I guess, is something I'm really fixed on, because sometimes it feels like people are probation officers who are, it's underfunded, they're overworked, and trying to think about, okay, I need to protect public, so I'll tick this, and this, and it's almost the more the merrier, and becoming really risk averse. But actually, that can be very counterproductive, and it means that leaving people with nowhere to go, no one to see, nothing to do, is actually more likely to increase the kind of risk of harm, of them becoming unsettled and stressed, and turning back to what they found some even temporary comfort in, or just feeling, you know, the world hates them and they may as well be the kind of person the world thinks they are. So I'd really like to see some querying and some questioning about license conditions and when they are useful and what they're there for, and when they're not. And I think probably the last, maybe my last area is about hope. We keep hearing about hope as this kind of buzzword. We need to give people hope. And I guess my plea is that, well, hope has to be it has to be aspirational. It has to be giving people the opportunity, they can see a way ahead to navigate difficulties and get through the sort of disappointments. But it can't be unrealistic. It can't be you'll go out into the world and the world will accept you and the world will do this and you'll find a job. And actually, you'll find that most employers won't want anything to do with you, that people, once they hear about you, will you know, throw bricks at your window. You'll have to move to an area where you don't know anyone. And even if you're a voluntary organisation trying to work with someone with a sexual conviction, you may find it more difficult because some funders might not want to fund you. Your insurance costs will probably go up, because not because of the stats, but because people are scared that you are working with what is seen as such a high risk, high reputational risk group. It's certainly not risk of harm. As I say, that's much lower than most other offences. And so we somehow need to kind of break through this kind of persona of people with a sexual conviction being as the media typically describe them, and we're going to get, you know, the number in terms of convictions is going up. The pandemic has meant that, you know, perhaps more people are turning to the internet. There's sexual addiction seems to be increasing, and you know, it's the person down the street who is someone with a sexual offence. It's not someone who's not unrecognizable. It's the average person now who may be someone who is on a slippery slope to a sexual conviction. And I think we need to be more inclusive. We need to fund probation better so they can provide the support, act as the sort of meso brokers, the idea that they can start to bridge the gap between a person leaving prison and them gaining a kind of a footing and a space in the world, which they're entering as a different person to what they were before. So I think those, I guess, are some of the bits I'd like to kind of pick up on, Chris. And I guess the families bit, the families and friends, where people do have connections to family and friends. I'd love to see prisons being able to do more, being able to have kind of weekend visits to keep the families and friendships kind of going, rather than, you know, an hour or so at a time. You know, I'd really like to see the sort of world opening up a little bit more in terms of helping people to integrate, not just ejecting into the outside world and then hoping there'll be voluntary organisations there to pick up the pieces, as it were, but to really try to keep some of that sort of integration going as people go through their sentences.
Thank you, Belinda. That was a brilliant opening to what is a very much more detailed briefing. So you've done really well to kind of highlight some key things, because there's 13 really practical areas to think about in that briefing, which I'm sure is food for thought for everybody here this morning. I had 3 reflections for you, which I'd be interested in your thoughts on, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. And I can see a few questions in the chat already, but if others have questions and thoughts coming to them as you're listening, then please do pop them in there. My first one, Belinda, is in the paper you say that there needs to be specialist services to support people leaving prison with a sexual conviction, and with that additional layer of complexity that sexual conviction involves, and you highlight gaps in current services. but a number of services that are designed to support people in the community do sometimes exclude people convicted of sexual offences. So I was interested on if you were maybe approached by one of the voluntary organisations that are here this morning and that wanted to do more to support people convicted of sexual offences, what would your advice be? And I guess where do you think the wider system is at the moment in terms of providing those kind of specialist services?
Well, I would just say to get on and to do that. And I said kind of specialist services, and I guess what I just mean is services, is that if we can just say, someone with a conviction who needs support, then that is what the voluntary organisation offers. And I guess almost I would probably not be drawn, if at all possible, on what type of conviction it is. It's just someone with a conviction, perhaps someone leaving prison, someone who needs support, and just to take away this sort of false divide that obviously I buy into at times, saying it's a specialist service that's needed. But I just think to say you've got a policy and a statement saying we support people with a conviction, we offer support, we undertake the appropriate assessments, risk of harm. You would need to consult with your staff and check, any concerns or queries or worries that staff have been kind of addressed, and then just to get on and do it.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I think the word specialist services does maybe create a risk that we further kind of draw boxes around people, and rather sometimes this is about, well, very often it's about making sure that the support that's available to everybody is available to everybody. So building on that then, in the section in the paper about social capital, you talk about social networks and you referred to peer support, and you've touched on this already about some of the challenges around licence conditions. And I guess just building on that, there has been a real growth, positive growth in peer support in the system, but with quite a notable exception around any specific peer support for people with sexual convictions. So despite those challenges that you highlighted around licence conditions, is there something that you think should be looked at and explored more in the future around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the literature in terms of peer support shows that actually the person giving the support benefits as much, if not more, sometimes than the person receiving the support. And I think that we all get skills from, I know in terms of like teaching, I learn possibly as much just by the act of sort of teaching. And I think the more we can get people involved in peer support, the better to I think it, I'm going to slip into the sort of academic of the empowers people, but it gives people a sense of, I've done something helpful, I've done something useful, I've contributed in some way. And I think all of these things are really helpful, and it skills people up to do something. So the more we can work through some of the complexities, which I think sometimes to do with is vulnerable person, what sort of checks are needed, what about insurance, etc. But the more we can do that, I think absolutely the better. And the peer support services, especially ones at the moment which perhaps exclude people with a sexual conviction, just to ask themselves as a starting point, let's, at the next board meeting, why do we exclude them? And I know, for example, there's some lived experience jobs, HMPPS, and someone I was in contact with, I was thinking that'd be great for them, really good. And they looked, and of course they applied, but it was no one with a terrorism offence, a sexual offence, or on life licence. And it's kind of why? So if the prison servants, yes, we want lived experience, but not those people. I mean, I can understand if it's a case-by-case basis, that this is something, actually this is not appropriate because of this, but just these blanket exclusions, which just seek to constantly put the person with a sexual conviction as you're an other, you're a different category, you are over there, so I think absolutely the more we can think about sort of peer support, and the more we can think about how we encourage that and make that happen within organisations, yes, the better.
And then just the last one from me before I hand over to Russell to field some questions from others. So in your conclusion, you talk about desistance not only being the remit of the person, but also the supervising probation officer and the wider community. And you make, when I read it, it was quite a powerful call to action about society's responsibilities in creating a space for individuals if we want to really allow people to move on. So if there were, can you give a couple of practical things to everyone here that they might take away to do to create space for individuals committing sexual offences? What would those practical things be, do you think?
Okay, so the practical things would be, so language. I would go through all the language and terminology in your documentation and in conversations, and I would change that language to person with a sexual conviction, if rather than the, as I say, the sort of sex offender phrase. So that's perhaps one thing. I would make sure as well that people are really aware of the accuracy of some things like the low reoffending stats, some of the information about, once someone has been out for several years, really how low that reoffending risk is. So just to get it into proportion to counter some of the misinformation you can hear or kind of get from the media. I also think things like Circles UK and the Charity Safe Living Foundation, Charities Corbett Centre, where you've got volunteers coming in and volunteers integrating and supporting someone with a sexual conviction, and you get this real ripple effect. And an example of this came across to me like some years ago. I was interviewing potential volunteers for a circle, and asked them, well, what would your parents or friends, family think? And the person said it was a kind of a young female, maybe about 22 years old, and she said, actually, my grandmother's absolutely terrified. She thinks I'm going to be raped. She thinks I'm going to be murdered. She thinks that she's really terrified. But I want to be a forensic psychologist, and I think it's a really good thing to do, and etc. And she said, so I talked it through with them, and they're kind of okay. And I saw her about 8 months later, and she'd been on a circle with a guy with a sexual conviction. And I said, oh, how are you doing, and what's happening now? And and how, how's your grandmother now? And I said, you know what? She's making him chocolate cookies now that she sends into the circle meeting. She said, and now she, because through this volunteer, she gets to hear how this guy's, what happened in his life, how he's trying to change it around. And so instead of this this view, it's suddenly actually, we want to support this guy and help him. And so sometimes it's about having contact, and so particularly, I guess, and here's where voluntary organisations can be so helpful, is really bringing in volunteers who have had perhaps no known association with someone with a conviction. I mean, we know there's lots more sexual offences happen and people are actually convicted for, but to actually kind of somehow meet the reality and actually realise there's people behind with their tragic and sad stories, and people who are desperate not to do the same thing again, rather than thinking of them as someone who is just on the lookout for when they can, commit the next kind of offence. And I think sometimes that has to be challenged by just contact and familiarity. So okay, so there's that, thinking about disclosure, and thinking about how that is done, about transparency, about employment, and about, do you need to exclude, and if so, have you thought really through this, and can you kind of include, can you not do it in a case-by-case basis? Why? Because it all adds fuel to the this is other, this is a different group, and so I think start thinking about employing someone with a sexual conviction, or at least not excluding, someone who applies. Stop. If this feels like very alien to you, then just start conversations about it. Talk to people, talk to staff, to the board. Understand what people are afraid of, what they're worried about, and try to kind of address those concerns rather than just actually let's all jump on the bandwagon of let's say no one with a sexual conviction, and then that's much safer. And it would be great to see, and I know there's a couple of prison governors thinking about it, of actually mixing, instead of having vulnerable prisoner wings and the mains wings. I mean, if we can't do it in prisons, then how can we do it outside as well? But and I think that's also something that I would love to see the prison service address as well.
Thanks, Belinda. And I think even just that suggestion of taking this briefing and using it to start some conversations in your own organisation, and ask some of those questions about what you're doing at the moment and how you might do it differently. That's really helpful. I can see we've got quite a few questions in the chat already. So if you have a question that you haven't already asked, please do pop it in the chat. Russell is going to now take on the task of trying to get through those questions. And any that we don't get to, we will try and pick up afterwards. And Belinda's contact details will be shared after the event for if people want to make contact with her directly. So Russell, can I hand over to you to do the Q&A?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Chris. And it's always a sign of a good event when the questions are queuing up. There's one for you for later, Belinda, which is someone just would like a link to the New York study you mentioned, but we'll let that kind of get sorted out after the event. I'm going to ask Alex Rose from Standout. Alex has asked about 3 questions, so I'm going to ask you to restrict yourself to 1, Alex. But if you'd like to ask one of your questions to Belinda, I think they're all really interesting. Looks like I've...
Sorry, Russell.
Oh, there we go.
No, I'm here, Russell, and thank you, Belinda, and good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm choking on a Snickers bar, which is really not helpful when being asked a question. I think the biggest question out of the 3 that I guess I'd love, Belinda, your thoughts on is how do we, I really agree with you with the points when you said in terms of changing language and it all starting with language. What's your thoughts in terms of how we can, how those, like us working in prisons can encourage that change of language amongst the population of people serving time in custody, because there are still very strong derogatory negative terms that people serving their time will use to describe people convicted of a sexual offence. And I was just kind of wondering, have you got any tips in terms of how to challenge that? Because it still feels really entrenched. And I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and you're right, and it is really entrenched. And I guess my suggestions would be to where there are some prisons still with BP wings and the sort of mains wings, is to think of a really fantastic employment opportunity workshop that people on both VP and the mains wing can attend, that people would be really keen to attend, and so that you're mixing people. And I guess as part of that, starting with a kind of a respect for each other ethos, which means no use of the sort of language that you're talking about. I guess it would have to start something like that, the sort of mixing together of wings and the mix and the changing of language. And and I don't think language is not going to change that kind of quickly, and there's going to be a real drag about it. But I think to start with that integration and that mixing, because if you know someone and like someone, you're less likely to call them the kind of derogatory label you're talking about. So I would start with, as I say, some fantastic and really attractive workshops in a prison that you could mix people and as I say, and start with that.
Thanks, Belinda. I'm going to kind of carry on with this theme now. There's a number of questions around kind of peer support, peer mentoring. Ruth McFarlane was asking about guidelines for that, but if it's okay with you, Ruth, I'm going to kind of skip and ask Adam Cornfoot to kind of share his kind of lived experience view of trying to actually provide peer support. Adam, over to you.
Hello there. Now, I seem to go a little bit against the grain here. I live 3 streets away from where I was arrested, still drinking the same pubs, make sure I'm seen out and about with the dogs every day. A couple of days after getting out of prison, I put a big black 4x4 on my drive so everybody knew I was back. That is due to being proud to maintain my innocence. This was at the disgust of the National Probation Service, unfortunately. But regardless of somebody's stance with regard to a conviction, there needs to be a lot of levelling up done. We cannot have organisations like HMPPS, with a going forward with employment scheme and things like that, discriminating against people because of the nature of the conviction. Because this instills me with the thoughts of, well, how can I show these people any respect? How can I ever engage with these people if they wouldn't be willing to employ me? I'm not going out, when I was on licence, I wouldn't go and engage with some organisation I was signposted to just to tick a box so that organisation could get funding to keep somebody else in a job at the expense of my time if I would never be eligible to work for them. That would be counterproductive in my opinion. And going on to what Belinda was saying about lack of social networking and support, a lot of people seem to be petrified of probation officers. I always said I'm not bothered about making friends in prison. I've got my real friends to play out with when I get home again. But a lot of people who sort of have made contact with me, who I did know from when I was inside, who've told me that they didn't have it on their licence, no known association or anything like that. I never did. And they would say, I still better check with my probation officer if it's all right to give you a ring. You'd say, well, why are people so scared? That's people who've been incarcerated are often as risk averse as a lot of HMPPS probation officers. And I think organisations like Belinda's organisation would benefit from actually making a lot of people aware as to what the rights and entitlements are. A lot of people feel the need that they need to disclose everything, whereas in fact, you don't. So how can we sort of strive to start levelling things up? And I think a lot of people who have been convicted do need to grow a bit of a backbone and stand up for themselves. And just in relation to the previous question, scrap VP wings altogether. Everybody should be integrated and getting along.
Thanks, Adam. I think you've given Belinda plenty to chew on there. So I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I think the problem is that probation, as I say, underfunded, don't have as much time, and I can absolutely understand why people want to check, because let's face it, the power to send someone back to prison is, and it was, even if it's an error, a mistake, then it would take someone 6 months to get back out again. So if it were me, I'd be checking and double checking and triple checking about what I could do. And therefore it is about a well-funded probation. I mean, forget the let's double sentences or do this or build more prisons. Can we not fund probation better so that that people who are working as probation officers can take the time to understand people's situations and not constantly acting on a reaction of, I better check this, supposing this, or I better do this. It's all risk averse, and actually they can't do a lot of the supportive stuff, a lot of the kind of connecting, the bridging people with really positive opportunities that I'm sure they would much rather be doing, and that could be much more helpful.
Thanks, Belinda. Risk management has come up. A lot of people kind of commenting on it, saying, well, what's it mean in practice? What is good practice around this? And a lot of people kind of keen to know and what the kind of balances are and how much to incorporate what people might have done to manage their own risks. But perhaps I'll ask Simon Scott to put his side of things.
Oh, sorry, I think my video is switched off. I guess you can hear me though, Belinda. I just wanted you, when you were talking about risk of harm, you suggested that voluntary organisations could assess risk of harm, and I just wanted to ask you how they do that.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think it's really difficult for voluntary organisations to do that. I think people can look at the risk reputational damage, but actually it tends to be, we think we've got this covered until something hits and it shows they haven't got it covered. I think a risk assessment, you know, the parole board, I think do a fantastic job in terms of working through someone, can their risk be managed in the community, and then you have the probation officer looking at that. So in many ways, if I was a voluntary organisation, I'd be liaising with the probation officer through the individual with a conviction and trying to have a conversation between is there something between us all about that we need to do or not do, and trying to keep kind of everyone informed and everyone aware in that triangle: person with a conviction, probation office, voluntary organisation, and for that to be a kind of an ongoing, you know, whether it's a conversation or, you know, I'm not talking about risk assessment tools, because I think you know, these are done by, you know, professionals, and these are done for the parole board, and best done, you know, at source by the people who are trained and accredited to use them. So I guess it's about having a clear policy about where you go to for kind of any assessment of risks or what the risks are, and then adding that, if it's a voluntary organisation, to your sort of plan of action, and any mitigating factors or controls, for example, in terms of media policy or messages you could put out. So I think probably people see it again, like disclosure, as a bit of a panacea, or we'll do a risk assessment and then that will be fine. And I think people used to see that there's a DBS checks like that. Oh, well, we'll do a DBS check and that'll be fine, without really thinking through what will we do when it comes back with something or nothing. You know, what is the follow-up practice? So I guess it's really for people to stop thinking we need to do this, but actually think, okay, who does it and who does it properly and who does it best, and this is who we will rely on and lean on, and just make sure we are well connected to them.
Thanks, Belinda. I think one of the, to me, if I was to try and inexpertly kind of summarize your paper, it's saying that we know a lot about desistance and how people rebuild their lives, construct a different identity that they need, family support from peers, and opportunities to change their lives, and that the current system makes that very difficult for people with sexual convictions. And Ruth McFarlane's got a specific question about people with sexual convictions getting into university and why that's such a kind of barrier. So I'm going to ask Ruth to ask that now.
Thanks, Russell, and hi, Belinda. So useful to hear everything that you're saying, and we definitely want to come back with. I've got loads of questions of follow-up I want to discuss with you, but I'll arrange that separately. My particular question was in regard to a specific case we've got at the moment with a student who's still currently in prison. He's been through the UCAS process, openly disclosed through his personal statement, and has full support of his probation officer. But of course, it's now going to a panel decision. And you know, the raw facts of his conviction are quite challenging for people to read. And we're really trying to engage with the university to encourage them to admit him. You know, he meets all of their other criteria. He's a really enthusiastic student. He's been doing so well while he's been in prison. Have you got any suggestions on what we might say, what we might bring to the university panel to encourage them to admit him?
Well, I think if probation are pro in terms of, then that is, you know, regardless of what you say, because you're on his side, so you don't count because you're a voluntary organisation who wants to do good things. So that doesn't, you know, you're therefore naive and etc. etc. But if probation is saying, actually, we think absolutely the risk can be, there is no risk, or the risk can be managed, or these are conditions. And if they talk to people in the university, and if there are people in the university who are also aware and knowledgeable, who are not simply reacting from fear or panic. So it's about, I guess, finding out, what are the who is it in the university who they're dealing with. But I would say probation. It's the parole board and probation. These are the experts on judging. Is someone safe to be released, and what are the risks, and is there anything we should be doing or managing? And I think I think that's by far your best bet, rather than anything you as a voluntary organisation really can say.
Sorry.
That's right. And
I feel I should say probation have been really supportive and helpful on this, and very constructive in their response. So yeah, we'll just have to keep fingers crossed that the right people are listening at the university.
And so the other thing is sometimes, and I have done this myself, is becoming a mentor to someone with a conviction or a sexual conviction who's attending the university, and I guess I'm often thinking of it from the person with the convictions point of view, as in providing a safe space for them to come and have a chat with me if they're if they're feeling kind of, I don't know, if they get stuck on their essays, or if they're feeling down or whatever. But sometimes the university also feels some sort of relief, or they're glad that they've got someone that they can then within the university system they can talk to. So even arranging a kind of almost a mentoring kind of scheme can sometimes help the sort of university. And I think also for me, the press office as well, making sure in terms of the university that the press office have a statement prepared in case something should come out. And that statement really needs to be just quite robust and quite neutral, is that we will take people from society, which includes people with and without convictions, and that the safety of our students is as paramount, and all steps, appropriate steps will have been taken, and then just cut off the conversation and don't allow it to sort of fester, really.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Thanks, Belinda. Ruth, I can see that Chris has dropped a resource in the chat to you, kind of specifically around UCAS. Can I ask you a question, Belinda, which I think we could have done the entire seminar on, but this kind of really fascinating bit about most people who have a conviction need to find an acceptable kind of sense of self to define themselves in other ways going forward. And just the challenge of doing that for someone with a sexual conviction, because that label sex offender is so kind of demonized and can cover so many different sort of crimes of massive kind of variance. But really fascinating to hear you say just a little bit more about helping people towards that journey of thinking about themselves kind of differently.
Yeah, and I think the sort of peer mentoring can do that. It's something, in psychology there's an idea of a kind of a social curse. There's a social cure. So if we join if we have a group identity and characteristics associated with that group identity, good ones, such as being a volunteer. That means I'm a nice person, I help other people, I support other people. It kind of improves our well-being. And the social curse of an identity, such as someone with a sexual conviction, detracts from people's well-being. So almost what people, I guess, need to do is to think of themselves, and we're all multi-layered people. I could be a runner, a mountain biker, I could be a religious to something. Religion can be an identity. It's who are you? What is the first thing when someone says, who are you? And really, I guess, pursuing something that of interest you, that can be your identity, so that you start to replace that that sort of master status that you've that's been kind of put onto you with something useful and sort of positive. So I guess it's however you can find that in whatever way you can find it. And sadly, at the moment, I think quite a lot of people who again, I'm going to use the phrase kind of lived experience. One of the few ways people can find it is by being someone with lived experience in the community, rather than it being something quite different to that. Something, as I say, a runner, I don't know, a dog lover, this or that, a Christian, etc. So I guess it's for everyone to try to find a space somewhere where they can take that as their, this is who I am. This is the me.
Brilliant set of questions from people that epitomizes for me why we wanted to do this event this morning, and why there's so much more work to do to support voluntary organisations. And I'll take that on for Clinks as well, for what we can do to support that. And that's precisely why this came up as an area that we wanted. I'm really grateful to Belinda for her time in writing that paper and in doing this event this morning. So thank you, Belinda, so much for giving up your time, for writing the paper originally, for being, I don't think you were forced, but for being persuaded, shall we say. Thank you everybody for coming this morning. It's been really a great discussion. If I can ask one last thing of you with 2 minutes left to go, we really value feedback on the events like this that we do. My colleague Sabrina has perfectly timed put a link to a quick form, which if you can just open the link and then once we finish, just spend 2 minutes just filling out a couple of questions, that'd be really useful to us. It's a lot harder virtually because people can leave the room. We used to kind of almost lock people in before they filled out a form. But if you can take 2 minutes, that would be really appreciated. We've recorded this event, so if you want to share this with colleagues, we will, as quickly as we can, get an edited version on our website, on our YouTube channel, and we'll share that with everybody here this morning, and it'll be on our website. We're doing some more of these in the future, coming months. We've got a publication which I won't name just yet, but coming out in a couple of months, the next one of the Evidence Library resources, and we'll advertise the event on our website. So keep an eye on our website, sign up to Light Lunch if you don't already get it. And with about 30 seconds to go, just again, thank you all ever so much, and particularly to you, Belinda. Hope you've had a great morning, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.